know one of the key questions we get from listeners is, and a sector that they're interested in, is finding out more about how to get a job in a tech startup. And that's one of the things we're going to cover today. So being a small firm, I guess you're very flexible in terms of how you're able to recruit people. And I know you've recently taken on some new graduates to join the team. Can you take us through the process and steps involved in recruiting them?
Yeah, sure. So I think certainly in the early days of the startup, and ideally as you grow as well, you use your personal network to start with. So you're basically, if you know someone personally and you know they're good, then that's obviously your first port of call. But after that, if someone else that you know recommends somebody to you, then that's worth a lot, because it simplifies the whole process, and you've got those trust points. So in terms of ways to get into startups, I think getting directly introduced or recommended by someone who's trusted by that startup is probably the number one way of getting in. Outside of that, of course, as you grow as a company, you can't just rely on your own network. So you have to start going out and trying to recruit externally. And there's a bunch of different ways startups can do that. So there's obviously there's events that are specific for startups. So there's things like Silicon Milk Roundabout in London. There's also there's the Tech, I think it's Tech City Jobs. They have a special one on financial services as well. So those are sort of one way. But I guess fundamentally, most of our applications come in through our website and our online application process. So what happens there is we'll advertise a role. We get a number of applicants through. We then sift that down in a multi-stage process. So first step is just to check a sort of sanity check on the application to make sure it's not just full of complete nonsense. Believe me, we get quite a lot of nonsense through that I could tell you about. After that, there's if they're successful through a sort of first sifting, they'd make it to a phone interview. And that would typically be up to half an hour with one of our employees. And that'll be a sort of general culture fit check and sort of, going through the CV. It's not, particularly high pressure, but one of the things we check very carefully is that the applicant knows who we are and what they're applying for, which actually weeds out a lot of people. I think it's strange, you might think, but actually a lot of people just don't seem to even have the first look at the website before they've got the call with the company. Seems quite strange. So then after that, we have usually 2 face-to-face interviews. Ultimately, one of those will be with myself and my co-founder, James, because we still personally interview anyone we're going to hire. And the final step is actually perhaps a little bit unusual. We take them to the pub with the team and basically make sure that they get on well with everyone, and that the rest of the team want to take them on board. Because I think there's one thing being able to do the job. It's another thing being fitting into a team and being part of that team. There's no drinking challenge as such, but it's more of a sort of personality test, and just check that do you actually want to work with us? Do we want to work with you? How's this going to work out in reality? And we try to only hire people that you'd actually want to spend some time with in the pub, basically.
And have you found many people have failed the pub test?
Yeah, you'd be surprised, but yeah, I mean because we check the feedback from the rest of the team afterwards, and it's it is quite tricky. I mean, we had one where there was someone who was just very, very quiet and didn't really engage with the rest of the team at all. We wouldn't want to hire someone who's the opposite end and really crazy. But you sort of need to feel like you're excited about hiring that person. They're going to come in and do a good job, but also make the place a bit brighter and nicer to work in if you can.
Interesting. And in terms of specific skills and attributes that you're looking from graduates, what would they be?
Depends on the role to some extent. So, but there's some sort of generic things we would look for in any applicant. When you're in a startup, it's not like a big corporate environment where you get sat down and told exactly what you're doing on a daily basis, and there's a very strong hierarchy and set of rules and procedures and processes. You've got to be much more self-starting in a startup, fairly obviously, but there aren't enough people around to be able to keep telling you what you should be doing every day. So we need to identify people that are comfortable in that environment, very self-starting, can just pick things up and run with them and be pointed at a more general area and figure it out to some extent. So, we've had that in multiple roles. And I think the great thing from the applicant's point of view and when they've got the job is that there's huge potential to grow in a startup that you just won't have in a big corporate, because you can very, very quickly take on huge amounts of responsibility. And the company's going to be really happy for you to take that on as best you can and to keep growing inside the organization. So in terms of, I guess the number one thing I'd look for is someone who, can deal with that sort of environment. Alongside that, as mentioned, they've got to fit in culturally with the team. So we only try to hire people who are pretty sort of friendly and outgoing and could be client facing. We'd have no worries about that, whatever their role, even if it's a very technical role, and quite well rounded because of the nature of the environment.
In a team of 20 people, you can't afford to have people not getting on. Yeah,
exactly. It's we had one hire like that, which was an intern that didn't work out, and it was apparent pretty quickly that was going to be a problem. And people like that can hide if you've got a multinational with thousands of employees, but not in a small startup.
Mm-hmm. So what can applicants do to yourself and other startups to make themselves stand out from the crowd?
I think personal recommendation is always the best route. But aside from that, I think taking the time to really know the company and something about them and make it a very personal application. And I realise that takes a lot more effort on the applicant's behalf. But I think there's no point in applying to 20 jobs, just chucking in a CV and getting 20 rejections and wondering why, when you could pick maybe 4 or 5 that you really, really want and take a bit longer to personalise the application. I think the best example I've ever seen was we advertised for a sales and marketing internship position a while ago. And we had someone who branded their CV in our company style with our logo on it and various other things. And they also, as part of their application, their covering letter had an assessment of our current marketing approach and how we could do it better. And it was just a one-pager in both cases, and it probably didn't take the guy that long. But it made it, what would have been a fairly standard CV rise right to the top in our interview process. So I'd say try to personalise it, and you've got to take a bit of time over that. You can't just do it while you're sat on the beach at Salou or something like that. You've got to really do it properly.